The psychological landscape of male attractiveness is a terrain often marked by a surprising degree of topographical blindness, where the possessor of aesthetic capital remains fundamentally unaware of the currency they hold. In my clinical practice and through my doctoral research, I have observed a recurring motif that suggests a profound disconnect between objective physical desirability and the subjective internal map of the individual. This phenomenon is not merely a display of humble posturing. Rather, it is a complex outcome of sociological conditioning, gendered feedback loops, and the specific ways in which masculinity is constructed in the modern era. When we examine the experience of attractive men who lack self awareness regarding their looks, we are looking at a cross section of identity formation that prioritizes utility over image. To understand this, we must first analyze the concept of intrasexual competition and the silencing of peer feedback. In the world of male socialization, the acknowledgement of another man's beauty is often suppressed by evolutionary mechanisms of envy. Unlike the female social sphere, where aesthetic compliments can serve as a form of bonding or social lubricant, male peer groups often operate on a hierarchy where acknowledging another man's physical superiority feels like a concession of status. Consequently, a man who is objectively handsome may grow up in a vacuum of silence. His male friends will rarely tell him he looks good. Instead, they may respond with subtle hostility, exclusion, or a hyper focus on his perceived flaws to level the playing field. I remember working with a client, let's call him Julian, who was a high performing architect with striking symmetry and a presence that naturally drew the eye. Julian came to therapy because he felt fundamentally unlikable. He described how in his male social circles, he often felt like an outsider, as if there was an invisible wall between him and the regular guys. He interpreted this coldness from other men as a sign that he was socially inept, or perhaps visually off-putting. In reality, his peers were reacting to his attractiveness with a protective layer of envy. Because they never validated his appearance, he developed a self-image that was skewed toward the negative. This leads us to our second theoretical pillar, the indirect nature of female attraction cues. Sociolinguistically, women are often socialized to avoid direct, assertive declarations of physical attraction to men, particularly toward those they find highly desirable. This is often a self-protective measure to avoid appearing desperate or to maintain a sense of social decorum. Instead of verbal praise, women often use proximity, sustained eye contact, or subtle physiological shifts. To a man who has not been taught to decode these nonverbal signals, this behavior is easily misread as simple friendliness, or in cases of extreme attraction, as intimidating avoidance. I see this frequently in my own life. My partner, who is a man of significant physical appeal, genuinely believed for the first 5 years of our relationship that he was average at best. When we would go out and women would stare or find excuses to initiate conversation, he would turn to me and wonder why everyone was being so remarkably polite that day. He had no internal framework for, I am being looked at because I am beautiful. This lack of awareness wasn't a lack of intelligence. It was a lack of cultural permission to see himself as an aesthetic object. This brings us to the provider archetype versus the aesthetic object. Historically and sociologically, men are taught that their value is derived from their utility, what they can build, provide, or protect, rather than their visage. This creates a psychological filter where a man will prioritize feedback about his competence over feedback about his face. To illustrate this, let's consider an analogy involving wealth and perception. I grew up in a family that was, by all economic measures, exceptionally well off. However, because my parents held a philosophy of invisible wealth, I spent the first 18 years of my life believing we were on the lower end of the middle class. We did not own designer clothing. There were no luxury sports cars in the driveway. My father drove used trucks until the engines failed, and my mother wore clothes she had owned for a decade. Yet my parents possessed multiple properties and significant liquid assets, all paid for in cash. I saw the assets, the houses, the land, but because they didn't look like the flashy wealth I saw in movies or at school, I didn't recognize them as wealth at all. I thought wealth was a Gucci bag, not a deed to a 100-acre farm. Many attractive men view their looks in the same way. They have the assets, the bone structure, the height, the clear skin. But because they don't see the flashy indicators of attraction, like being chased down the street or receiving constant verbal adoration, they assume the assets don't exist. They are waiting for the designer bag version of attraction while they are sitting on a real estate version of it. This misperception is further reinforced by childhood development and the gendered praise gap. Recent research in 2025, which analyzed over 20,000 parental interactions, confirms a reliable tendency to offer sons utility based praise while offering daughters aesthetic based praise. Even when a son is remarkably handsome, parents are statistically more likely to say, "You are so strong," or "You are so smart," rather than "You are so handsome." This creates a foundational identity where the boy learns that his self is located in his actions, while his body is just the machine that carries those actions out. A handsome man, therefore, does not look in the mirror and see a beautiful man. He sees a functional man. If the machine is working, he doesn't question its paint job. This leads to a deep susceptibility to manipulation in adulthood. Because these men do not realize they are high value aesthetic targets, they often feel they must overcompensate in relationships by giving more than they receive. In my clinical experience with couples, I often see the giver receiver dynamic where the husband, who is significantly more attractive than he realizes, is constantly asking, "What can I do better? How can I serve more?" While the partner may be using his attractiveness as a tether without offering him the validation he doesn't even know he needs. He views himself as the eternal giver because he doesn't realize he has already given something just by being present. He doesn't know that his mere existence in the space is a form of value. This results in a stoic filter where compliments are either ignored or treated with suspicion. If a man is told he is handsome, he might think the person is being manipulative, or that they want something from him, or that they are simply mistaken. He cannot integrate the praise because it contradicts his internal map of being a utility provider. In conclusion, the attractive man who is unaware of his desirability is a product of a society that refuses to look men in the eye and tell them they are beautiful. It is a world where men are punished by their peers for their looks and rewarded by society only for their labor. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for both men and women. For men, it is about reclaiming the right to exist as an aesthetic being without shame. For women, it is about understanding that the handsome man in front of you might be starving for a kind of validation he was never taught to ask for. We must bridge this gap of awareness not for the sake of vanity, but for the sake of a more integrated and honest self perception. It is not enough to be attractive. One must also be allowed to know it, to own it, and to navigate the world with the clarity that comes from seeing oneself as a whole person. Utility, heart, and beauty combined. This awareness doesn't lead to arrogance, it leads to a grounded sense of peace. When a man finally realizes that he is attractive, the need to overperform often vanishes, allowing him to enter relationships from a place of equality rather than one of perceived deficit. The journey to this realization is often long, requiring the unlearning of decades of social silencing, but it is a necessary evolution for the modern masculine psyche. By examining these sociological and psychological threads, we can begin to see the invisible mirror that has been held up to men for generations. A mirror that reflects back their work, their sweat, and their output, but leaves their face in the shadows. It is time we turn the light on the whole man.